The Chosen Season 5, Episode 1 is packed with intense emotions, shocking confrontations, and scenes that completely change what we thought we knew. From Jesus' heartbreaking mornings at the Last Supper to a major clash at the temple, this episode sets the stage for one of the most powerful seasons yet. But there are new moments you might have missed, scenes that add deeper layers to the story, making everything feel more real than ever. Let's break it all down. Episode 1 begins with the echoes of the Last Supper, and this time, The Chosen takes a daring new approach. Instead of saving the meal for a dramatic finale, we are given the pieces slowly, bit by bit, stretched across the season. It is not one single night. It is a thread weaving through everything else we see. And so, from the opening moments, we are already in the shadow of betrayal. Jesus' words carry a heaviness that chills even those who believe they understand him. He looks around the table, sorrow in his eyes, and asks a question that slices straight through time. Do you truly believe? The disciples rush to assure him that they do. Their voices are strong, but beneath them lies uncertainty. They cannot see what he sees. They do not know that their faith will soon be tested to its breaking point. The tension grows even sharper as the camera lingers on Judas. His face betrays nothing, and yet everything. There is a flicker of doubt, a moment of distance, a shadow that suggests a storm already brewing within him. But he does not speak. He does not protest. He simply waits, silent, as though history itself is holding its breath. This silence is more terrifying than any outburst, because silence leaves space for the choices he will soon make. From this haunting beginning, the story pulls us outward into the road to Jerusalem. The disciples follow Jesus, but their hearts are heavy. Every step feels like it carries them closer to something inevitable, and though they cannot name it, the dread is there. The city waits ahead like a beast, walls towering, the sound of festivals rising, the promise of celebration hiding a truth only Jesus fully understands. This is not just a journey into the holy city, it is a march toward his destiny, and that destiny is death. When the moment of the triumphal entry finally arrives, it is both glorious and terrifying. Jesus rides into Jerusalem, not on a war horse, not with an army, but on a donkey, a symbol of humility, a symbol of peace. The crowd explodes with joy, shouting, and it is here that the Chosen begins layering the story with voices of doubt. Zebedee, father of James and John, is furious. He looks at Jesus and cannot contain his fear. "Do you know what they're calling you?" he demands. "Son of David. Do you understand what that means?" He sees danger, not glory. To him, this ride into the city is reckless, a spark that will ignite the fury of Rome and the Sanhedrin alike. Joseph, too, usually quiet and reserved, voices his concern. He does not rage like Zebedee, but he trembles with fear. "Are you ready for this?" he asks softly. "Are we?" Jesus answers neither with anger nor explanation. His calm in the middle of their storm is what makes the moment even more striking. He knows what lies ahead. He knows the city will turn on him. He knows the shouts of Hosanna will soon become "Crucify him," and yet he does not turn back. He does not flinch. His face is set like stone toward the cross. This is not about politics, not about rebellion, not about seizing power. This is about fulfilling God's will, and he will not be moved from it. The paradox of this moment is breathtaking. On the outside, the people are singing with joy, believing their Messiah has come to bring them freedom. On the inside, his disciples whisper in fear, unable to reconcile their hopes with the growing tension pressing in on all sides. And at the center of it all rides Jesus, silent, steady, determined, a king who has no crown of gold, only the shadow of a crown of thorns. But perhaps the most haunting scene comes when the crowd fades and the noise dies down. Jesus, standing on the wall, looks out over Jerusalem with tears in his eyes. This city has celebrated him, but he knows it will soon destroy him. His lament cuts deeper than any shout of joy. He foresees the destruction of the temple, the ruin of the holy city, the cries of a people who rejected the very one who came to save them. The vision is devastating, and it pierces not just him, but us as viewers, because in this moment, we see what no one else in the crowd sees. We see the future. We see the cost. The Chosen has always excelled at showing us the human side of these holy stories, and in this episode, the humanity comes through with brutal clarity. Jesus is both lion and lamb here. He accepts the praise, yet mourns for the people giving it. The excitement of the crowd should have been a comfort to the disciples, but instead, it felt like a storm waiting to break. Everywhere they turned, people were whispering the name of Jesus. some with joy, some with suspicion, and some with anger hidden behind forced smiles. The Sanhedrin watched from the shadows, their faces carved in stone, every cheer for Jesus echoing like a threat to their power. The disciples could sense it. For all the praise in the streets, there was danger in the air, sharp and unseen. They had followed Jesus this far, seen his miracles, heard his teachings, and yet in this moment, some of them wondered, was this the beginning of his victory or the beginning of his end? Peter clenched his fists, trying to hold on to courage, but fear still crept in. John looked at Jesus, seeing both the calm of a shepherd and the fire of a king ready to walk into battle. The clash between love and power was no longer far away. It was here, and it was unavoidable. As they entered Jerusalem, the disciples saw how divided the city was. To the poor, Jesus was hope. To the powerful, he was a problem that had to be solved quickly. And Judas, walking among them, felt the pull of both sides. His heart was torn between loyalty and ambition, between the words of his teacher and the promises whispered to him in secret. Every step Judas took carried the weight of a decision he had not yet made, but everyone would soon feel its impact. Even when Jesus spoke gently to the disciples, offering parables and warnings, Judas kept silent. His silence was heavier than words. The others noticed but said nothing, afraid of the truth they were beginning to suspect. And still, Jesus rode forward, knowing the road ahead was leading him to the very reason he had come into this world. The disciples found themselves at the temple. A place of prayer turned into a place of profit. What happened next shook them to their core. Jesus overturned tables, scattering coins and driving out merchants with a voice that thundered like the prophets of old. The people gasped, the rulers seethed, and the disciples could barely keep up with the storm unleashed before them. They had seen his power over nature, over sickness, even over death, but this moment felt different. This was a direct strike at the heart of those who held control. The Sanhedrin would never forget it, and they would never forgive it. The disciples realized that Jerusalem would not. Night in Jerusalem was different. The streets that had roared with celebration in daylight now whispered with fear and suspicion. Torches burned in the courtyards, casting long shadows against stone walls, and the disciples huddled together, trying to process everything that had happened. They were no longer just followers of a teacher, they were companions of a man who had openly challenged the highest authorities in the land. Every sound outside felt like footsteps coming closer. Every whisper like a plot being formed against them. Some tried to reassure each other, reminding themselves of the miracles they had seen, but deep down they could not silence the question that haunted them. What would happen next? And then there was Judas. Sitting apart from the others, quiet and restless, his mind was a battlefield. He was watching his brothers in faith, but also thinking of promises of power and protection offered elsewhere. His silence carried a danger the others could not yet name. Jesus, however, was not shaken. As they gathered in the upper room, he spoke with a calm authority that both comforted and unsettled them. He warned them of trials to come, of betrayal and denial, of a path that would test every ounce of their faith. His words were heavy, but his eyes carried hope. To Peter he spoke directly, telling him that his boldness would be tested, that his strength would fail before the rooster crowed. Peter, defiant as ever, swore he would never abandon him, yet deep inside a tremor of doubt was already forming. To the group, he gave parables that hinted at suffering, but also at victory beyond suffering. They wanted to believe the victory was near, yet the way he spoke made it clear it would not come in the way they imagined. Some leaned closer, desperate for understanding, while others sat in uneasy silence, unwilling to face the storm he was preparing them for. The city outside was restless, but inside that room, the tension grew heavier with each passing moment. Judas avoided Jesus' gaze, and though no one called him out, the unease around him grew thicker. Every gesture, every sigh, felt like part of a secret he was hiding. Jesus broke bread with them, his hands steady, his voice unwavering, as if he was setting into motion something far greater than they could yet grasp. The disciples felt the weight of destiny pressing in, but none of them truly understood that history itself was turning in that very moment. And still, Jesus remained calm. Where the disciples saw danger, he saw fulfillment. Where they saw the threat of death, he saw the promise of life. Yet even with his words, even with his peace, fear was rising in their hearts. They did not yet realize that one of their own was already standing on the edge of betrayal, ready to step into the night where there would be no turning back. When night fell over Jerusalem, the city seemed to change its face. What had been filled with cheers, palm branches, and loud celebration in the daylight turned into narrow, watchful streets lined with silence. The glow of torches flickered along stone walls, making shadows dance like restless spirits. Every alley seemed to whisper secrets, and every group of men huddled together looked like they were plotting. For the disciples, the air felt heavier than ever before. The joy of the crowd was still fresh in their minds, but so too was the fury of the rulers. They could not escape the truth that hung over them. Jerusalem was not Galilee. Here, they were walking straight into the heart of power, and power did not welcome them. The disciples stayed close together, speaking in hushed voices, looking to Jesus for answers. They had seen him calm storms and raise the dead, yet the tension pressing down on them tonight was not something a miracle could simply sweep away. It was the feeling of destiny, drawing closer with each step they took. Inside the upper room, the flicker of lamps lit their faces as they gathered around Jesus. The world outside was restless, but in that quiet chamber, time seemed to slow. The disciples looked at their teacher, waiting for words that might bring clarity or courage, but what he spoke was far more unsettling. He told them plainly that trials were coming, that their faith would be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. His voice was steady, his eyes filled with both warning and compassion, and yet his words cut deep. He said that one among them would betray him. The room fell silent. Their hearts raced, their minds spun, each man wondering who could be capable of such a thing. They exchanged glances, searching one another's faces, but the silence only grew heavier. Judas sat among them, his expression unreadable, his lips pressed tightly shut. No one accused him, not yet, but unease surrounded him like a shadow. The very air seemed to tremble with the weight of what was unsaid. Then Jesus spoke to Peter directly. Bold, fiery Peter, the one who had sworn his loyalty louder than all the rest. Jesus told him that before the rooster crowed, he would deny him 3 times. Peter's face flushed with disbelief and pride, and he declared that such a thing could never happen. He would stand by Jesus no matter what. And yet, somewhere deep inside, even Peter felt a crack forming. He had always been brave in words, but words could not stop fear. The others listened in silence, torn between admiration for Peter's boldness and fear that Jesus' words might prove true. They wanted to believe in their own strength, but the way Jesus spoke made it clear. Their strength would fail, but his mission would not. This was not the kind of kingdom they had imagined. It was something deeper, something eternal, but it would pass through suffering first. As they shared bread and wine, Jesus' words became even more haunting. He broke the bread and said it was his body. He lifted the cup and called it his blood, poured out for many. The disciples did not fully understand, but his voice carried a tone of finality that made their hearts tremble. They were part of something that would shake the world, but at that moment, it felt as if the world was closing in on them. The table, once a place of fellowship and laughter, now felt like a battlefield where invisible lines were being drawn. The disciples clung to his words, not knowing how much they would mean in the days to come. Judas, still silent, avoided meeting their eyes. Every movement he made, every glance toward the door, seemed to signal that he was already halfway gone, walking a path none of them dared to imagine. When Jesus finished speaking, a deep stillness filled the room. Outside, the city murmured with unrest, but inside, the disciples sat with heavy hearts, trying to grasp what they had just heard. None of them could fully understand the weight of his warnings, but they felt it. They could sense that something irreversible was beginning. Fear gripped them, yet Jesus remained calm, as though he could already see beyond the suffering to the victory on the other side. To him, the betrayal, the denial, the suffering, it was not the end. It was the purpose for which he had come. But the disciples could not see that yet. To them, the darkness outside mirrored the darkness closing in on their hearts. And somewhere in that darkness, Judas was preparing to step out into the night, where the whispers of betrayal waited for him. The road ahead was now set, and none of them were ready for how quickly it would unfold. As the night deepened, Jesus led the disciples out of the room and into the cool air of the Mount of Olives. The city was quiet, But the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, like the stillness before a storm. The disciples walked close behind him, their footsteps crunching softly on the rocky path. They were weary, confused, and burdened with the weight of his words. Each man wrestled with his own thoughts. Peter replayed his bold promises in his head, determined to prove that Jesus was wrong about him. John, always closest to the teacher's heart, could not shake the dread that filled his spirit. Thomas still doubted, struggling to make sense of a kingdom built on suffering. And Judas, his eyes fixed ahead but his thoughts already elsewhere, knew his time to act was near. He walked among them, yet in truth, he was no longer one of them. His heart had already stepped into the shadows. When they reached Gethsemane, Jesus asked the disciples to sit and pray. His voice was calm, but his face carried a sorrow deeper than they had ever seen. For the first time, they saw their master weighed down, not by the anger of rulers or the demands of the crowds, but by something far greater. He moved a little further from them, falling to his knees, his words trembling with both pain and surrender. "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." The disciples listened from a distance, but their eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. One by one, they drifted into sleep, unable to keep watch with him. The Son of God was pouring out his soul in agony, and his closest friends could not stay awake. Even Peter, who had sworn undying loyalty, could not overcome the weakness of his flesh. In the silence of the garden, Jesus prayed alone, his sweat falling like drops of blood, every breath carrying the weight of the world's sin. And while he prayed, Judas slipped away. His absence did not startle the others, too tired to notice. But in truth, his choice was already sealed. He had made a bargain with those who hated Jesus, exchanging loyalty for silver. Now, with every step away from the garden, he walked deeper into betrayal. His heart was torn, but ambition and fear pulled him forward. He told himself it was for the greater good, that perhaps this would force Jesus to reveal his power and claim his throne. But deep inside, Judas knew. He was handing over the Son of God to death. The weight of that truth pressed on him, yet he did not turn back. The silver was in his hand, and the soldiers were waiting. Back in the garden, Jesus returned to his disciples and found them asleep again. His voice carried both sadness and love as he asked, "Could you not watch with me for 1 hour?" But still, they did not understand the urgency of the moment. To them, it was another night, another prayer, another warning. They did not realize that the footsteps of soldiers were already echoing through the city streets, drawing nearer with every passing minute. They did not realize that the betrayer was leading those soldiers straight to them. And Jesus, though grieved, was not surprised. He rose to his feet, his resolve unshaken. He knew what was coming, and he was ready to face it. The disciples, still half asleep in both body and spirit, had no idea how quickly their world was about to shatter. Then came the sound. The clash of armor, the rhythm of boots, the flicker of torches cutting through the darkness. The disciples stirred, their eyes widening as they saw the line of men approaching. And at the front of the crowd was Judas. His face was lit by firelight, his steps steady, but his soul broken. The disciples looked at him in disbelief, realizing too late what he had done. The man they had trusted, laughed with, prayed beside, he was the one leading their enemies straight to Jesus. And still, Judas came closer, offering the kiss of betrayal that would mark the beginning of the end. The moment Judas stepped forward, the garden no longer felt like a sanctuary. The air was charged with betrayal, every breath thick with dread. Judas came close to Jesus, his voice soft, almost tender, as he greeted him with the word, "Rabbi." And then he kissed him, a gesture of friendship twisted into a sign of treachery. The soldiers moved in at once, their torches flaring, their swords gleaming. The disciples froze, their hearts pounding in disbelief. For all the warnings Jesus had given them, they had never truly believed it would come to this, that one of their own would bring the enemy straight to him, that the teacher they had followed through storms and miracles would now stand bound like a criminal. Peter, burning with rage, refused to stay still. He grabbed his sword, striking wildly, his blade cutting off the ear of the high priest's servant. For a moment, chaos erupted. But Jesus, calm even in betrayal, rebuked Peter and healed the wounded man. His voice cut through the frenzy. filled not with anger, but with authority. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Peter's hands trembled, his heart shattered. This was not the victory he had imagined. This was surrender, and he could not understand it. The disciples looked to one another in panic. Should they fight? Should they run? Their courage, so bold in words hours before, collapsed under the weight of fear. The soldiers bound Jesus, their ropes rough against his wrists, yet he did not resist. His silence was more powerful than any struggle could have been. It was the silence of a man who had already chosen his path, who had already accepted the cup that others begged him to refuse. The disciples stood stunned, their world unraveling before their eyes. Just hours ago, they had dined with him, sworn their loyalty, listened to his promises. Now, under the glow of torches, they saw him surrounded by armed men, treated like a criminal, dragged into the night. Every promise of bravery melted into fear. One by one, the disciples fled into the shadows, leaving Jesus alone. The teacher they had sworn never to abandon was left in the hands of those who sought his death. And Judas, his part was done. The silver burned in his pocket, heavier than chains. He had done what he thought would give him power, yet as he watched Jesus led away, he felt only emptiness. The kiss still lingered on his lips, a mark he could never wash away. His eyes, once filled with ambition, now burned with regret. But regret could not undo what he had set in motion. History had turned, and Judas was forever marked as the one who betrayed the Son of God. The other disciples, scattered and broken, would wrestle with their own shame in the nights to come. Peter would soon face the weight of his denial, and the rest would hide in fear, wondering if they were next. Yet even in this darkest moment, Jesus was unshaken. He had warned them it would be this way. He had told them the world would hate him, that suffering would come, and still, he chose this road. The disciples could not yet see it, but in his surrender was victory. In his arrest was freedom. In his silence before his enemies was the voice of salvation for all mankind. The story was not ending in that garden. It was only beginning. But for the disciples, in that hour, all they saw was the teacher they loved taken away, the kingdom they had hoped for slipping through their fingers, and the night swallowing them in fear. The garden grew still again after the soldiers marched off with Jesus. The torches faded into the distance, leaving behind only the shadows of trees and the silence of broken promises. The disciples would never forget that night, the night their courage failed, the night Judas betrayed, the night Jesus chose the cross. And though they could not understand it yet, the very moment that shattered them was the moment that would one day save them.